Today. It's been a while since we've had an interview, but today I'm very excited because we have Todd Marquardt, who's the owner of the Marquardt Law Firm, and he also has a radio show, a weekly show called Talk Law Radio, which you can hear about on www.talklawradio.com. Todd is an attorney providing legal advice and design of tax-protected inheritance and legacy plans, last wills, and living trusts. And he's a radio host to help you discover your legal issue blind spots by listening to him talk about the law on the radio, which airs on KLUP 9:30 a.m. radio, Saturdays at 11 o'clock in the morning. Be sure to check that out at www.talklawradio.com. And you can also watch on Facebook Live, YouTube, or listen on any podcast platform. Todd, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being on, and thanks for having me on your show. It was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun.
Yep, talking about some of those banking scares. And I thought I would start by asking you an icebreaker question so people can get to know you. If you could meet any historical figure from the past, who would you have dinner with them? Who would you want to have dinner with?
I thought about that a lot, Joseph, and I could pick a president. I could pick a national celebrity, but I think I would go with Jace Robertson, one of the Duck Dynasty guys, because I used to watch that with my kids when they were little, and they would go hunt and then they would cook, and so I would want to eat with them so that I could experience their version of a wild game dinner.
Nice, very cool. I remember that show. That used to be a huge hit back in the day. I remember Duck Dynasty. Very cool. And first of all, let's start with your background, Todd. How did you get to where you are today? You know, owning a law firm, working in elder law, estate planning law. How did you get how did you get there? What's your background?
It's a long story, but I was supposed to be an optometrist. My dad was an optometrist. My granddad was an optometrist, and I was the only one in the family that was somewhat interested in the medical field. And I struggled with calculus and chemistry. And I had taken chemistry 3 times, and I had taken calculus once, and that was enough for me. And I knew that I needed high grades in those classes, and I wasn't getting them. But what I was really interested in was government and political science. So I graduated with a degree in government, in law and society, and political theory, and knew that I had to go somewhere else with that, because I had worked in the state land office in Santa Fe, New Mexico as a legislative liaison. And what I saw there was unhappy government workers, and I knew that I didn't want to be an unhappy government bureaucrat. And so I learned about law school. People kept telling me about different aspects of it and where to go. And so that's what led me to St. Mary's here in San Antonio, Texas. The general counsel for the state police had gone there, and she said, I just had to go there. Well, the dean at the time, the dean of the law school, was also from New Mexico. And so that's why she had gone there. And so she sort of recruited me. And I just really loved the city of San Antonio, because even though it's a big city, people who live here pretend like it's a small town.
Yeah. It's kind of cool. Yeah. Go ahead.
The way that I sort of ended up running a law firm is because my granddad was a small business owner and my dad was a small business owner. I sort of was drawn to that. And it all started in high school when a friend of mine and I started a lawn care business. When I found out that my friend was making money from other people mowing their lawns, I said, I want in on this. And so we did that for several summers and even tried to keep it going when we left college. And from then on, I just sort of had the business owner mentality. I wanted to create my own destiny. but I really didn't have the skills to do that. Uh, Everything I learned in government and political science and law school had nothing to do with business. And so the only way that my path led to my own business was because God had designed that path. And every time I made a mistake in business, He led me out of it. So I give all the glory to God.
I love it. Amen. Can you tell me about one of those times you mentioned, every time you made a mistake, God would put you right back on the right path? Can you tell me about one of those times in business where, you were set up to be where you are today, a successful law firm owner, radio host?
Expenses and revenue,
Yeah.
I learned to keep my overhead low.
Mhm.
And I also learned that I needed to have a good CPA to teach me about taxes. And so all of these things sort of just kept falling into place. Um, I would meet with my accountant almost every month just to talk about bookkeeping and taxes and expenses and how to keep everything in line. And I read lots of books. I listened to lots of audio programs on how to run a, run a business, how to be a good leader. I went to business workshops, management workshops. I spend quite a bit of money every year still today with business consulting, training, and management workshops.
Mhm. Very cool. Very cool. And I wanted to start with basics. I know when I came on your show, you asked me, what is money? We went very basic, talking about the barter
Right.
system, things like that. What, and I want to focus mainly on estate planning because that's kind of related to what I do in financial planning. I know we work a lot
Mm-hmm.
with estate planners. What is estate planning?
Estate planning is how you arrange your legal affairs so that you can pass on what you have to your beneficiaries in the most tax efficient way imaginable. I like to focus on helping people tax efficiently protect and preserve assets, reduce family conflict, and maximize benefits when available.
Yep. And I wanted to talk about some of those things you talk about, like family conflict. That's something you see a lot when it comes to when someone passes away and you can't read their mind. You don't know exactly what they wanted. We all saw that with, I remember when I was a kid, I believe Terry Schiavo case.
Right.
It's very sad. But I want to talk about some of those things that you can avoid because I was doing some research on this and I found like unintended heirs or having an heir that you didn't want or someone getting money that you didn't want to give money
Oh
to.
yeah, the laughing heir.
Yep. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, if you don't die, if you die without a will, then the state of Texas has written one for you. And the people that could inherit from you, those are called heirs, Heirs, and they inherit whether you like it or not. And so a laughing heir is somebody who isn't sad that you died because they didn't even know you. And the only reason that they're inheriting from you is because you didn't name beneficiaries in a last will and testament or trust. And so many people don't want to leave assets to people they don't know. They don't want to leave assets to um, a government that is irresponsible in its spending. And so the only way you can avoid leaving assets to somebody you don't want is to name people that you do want.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. It makes logical sense, but I think a lot of times people don't want to think about estate planning. It's a tough thing to think about your own mortality, the fact that you're going to pass away one day, right? What do you do to calm people down when it comes to that? Or what would you say to people who feel like apprehension even thinking about like this is what I'm going to do with my stuff after I die? What
Well,
advice
I,
would you give?
I ask them to think about their ideal scene. If they want an organized disposition of their assets after they pass away, if they want their family members and their beneficiaries to be at peace instead of in conflict, I try to ask them to focus on all the good vibes and feel good feelings that everyone's going to have, because you had your affairs in order. Everything was taken care of. Everything was easy. A seamless transition of property and of administration.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Appreciate it. I can start with some basics, and then I wanted to get into why you chose estate planning after that.
Okay.
But some of the basics, can you tell me just very basic, like fundamentals? What is a will or a last will and testament?
Well, the last will and testament is the legal document that allows you to dispose of your assets after you pass away. So it's what your will is, what your wishes are. And testament was an old word that meant the same thing. And so people just combined those two words and phrases to mean the legal document that passes on things after you're gone. Because after you're gone, you're not going to be able to sign a deed. You're not going to be able to write a check, because you're in heaven, hopefully. And so you appoint an executor to manage those things for you, to pay your bills, wrap up your affairs, and write those checks and sign those deeds over to the beneficiaries.
Awesome. Awesome. And when it comes to choosing that executor, like what advice would you give people of choosing an executor for your passing money down to your heirs?
Yeah, it's real important that you choose somebody who's trustworthy, who's worthy of trust, and who's responsible, who's going to get the job done. I've seen people name somebody who didn't follow the instructions in the will. It's illegal and they can be sued for money damages. But you can save a whole lot of heartache and money for your beneficiaries by choosing the right person in advance. And if you don't have somebody like that in your life, you need to make new friends, or you need to name a bank or financial institution to get the job done. Now, they charge a fee for that, but I tell people I'd rather the bank do it and get it done right than for my family to mess everything up and lose money.
Yeah, for sure. Very good. And wanted to ask you about trust. And sometimes I hear people like say like, should I get a will or a trust? But what is a trust, first of all? And then how would you respond to that question if someone were to ask you, like, I know it depends on the situation, but when does a will make more sense? When does a trust make more sense?
Okay. A trust is more like a legal relationship of parties. Of course, it's on a written document, but it's a relationship. You have the person that's creating the trust, called the grantor, settlor, or trust maker. You have the trustee who manages the assets and carries out the terms of your trust. And then you have the beneficiary who benefits from the things that you're putting in the trust. So the trustee's duty is to provide for the beneficiary according to the terms in the written document. And the reason that some people decide to use a trust instead of a will is because of this. Let me ask you a question. What three things have to happen in order for a will to be useful? Number one, you have to have one. Number two, you have to die. The will is a death instrument. It says what happens after death. It doesn't do anything until after death. And number three, it's not useful until a judge approves of it. A judge has to probate the will. Probate comes from the Latin word probare, which means to prove. So because some people will write their will on a napkin or a scratch piece of paper, like Howard Hughes, the famous movie producer and airline test pilot, the rest of us who use an attorney still have to have our wills reviewed in court. Well, a trust, on the other hand, does not need that because it's just a contract that is honored and executed on its own, and so you don't have to go through the court. But here's the catch.
Mhm.
In order for the trust to work, the trust has to own your assets. And some assets we transfer right away, and other assets we transfer later. That's all dependent on what kind of assets you have and what you need to accomplish while you're alive and after you pass away. So the trust also works during life. So there's a whole section on incapacity. And I like to put a lot of detail into that section because doctors have figured out how to keep us alive a long time. And so I want to explain and give direction to the trustee about how I want to be taken care of if I'm incapacitated or disabled. So that's more like what a revocable living trust would do. There's other kinds of trusts that are irrevocable that you might use for wealth planning, like an irrevocable life insurance trust or an irrevocable grantor trust if you wanted to take advantage of the high federal estate tax exemption we have today in preparation for the expiration of the high exemption amount, which will come to pass probably in 2026 if Congress decides to do nothing, which they usually
do. Fair enough, fair enough. We'll talk about, I know there's a lot more to estate planning, but I wanted to get into what inspired you to get into the field of estate planning. So why did you choose that as a focus for your practice?
When I started law school, I was planning on being a patent attorney. And I discovered after enrolling and after studying for a few months that in order to be a patent attorney, you have to have an undergraduate degree in biology or engineering. And so I didn't do that. I couldn't go that route. I'd have to go back to undergraduate school if I wanted to do that. I was just interested in intellectual property, and I took some classes. I think it was my second year. I took wills and estates, and we studied a lot of court cases. And at the end of the court case, the professor would talk about issues, and sometimes there would be comments in the case book that we would answer. And there was a comment in this wills and estates casebook about elder law. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but I got this feeling that that is what I was meant to do. Because my parents were divorced when I was about 4 years old. And my mom had to go back to school. My mom had to start working full time. And so my grandparents would help out a lot on both sides, my dad's mom and dad, my mom's mom and dad. And so they would take me to get a haircut, or they would take me to the doctor, or they would take me to swimming lessons. And in those car rides, and when they were watching me at their house, they would talk to me about their stories. They would tell me what it was like growing up on the farm in Nebraska or growing up on the farm in Kansas. My mom's mom came over, her mother came over on a covered wagon to New Mexico to farm beans. And so I learned the value of their family. I learned the value of hard work, and I just enjoyed talking to them about their stories. And so I figured if I can talk to older people about their stories, I think that would be a pretty good day.
Yeah. A lot of wisdom. I love it that you can learn from that. That's cool. What would you say, like, one of the principles that guide you in business when it comes to either the radio show or your law firm, or both?
Well, I'm a very religious person, and so I look at the Bible. I study the Bible. I've been very active in my church. I've tried to raise my kids the same way. So I think of the cross, and I use the image of the cross for a lot of different things. In my personal life, I think of my faith, my family, my vocation, and my community. So that's the sign of the cross that I think about daily to keep things in order. And for the law firm, I also use an image of the cross. And the cross is created by the 4 practice areas where we focus. I use a Venn diagram to show how the different practice areas intersect. We have business law, estate law, elder law, and administration and probate and trust. And when those 4 circles intersect, you see a cross. And that's the guiding light for the law firm, in that I do try to point people to Jesus, because what better story of inheritance than the story of Jesus? He gave us eternal life as our inheritance. It says that in the Bible. I didn't make this up. It's just a perfect parallel to what we do for our families when we leave an inheritance. Now, we don't leave them anything so valuable as eternal life in heaven with God the Father, but we leave them something to help them out, to make things better down the road.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Very cool. And he talked about these different areas, all these different areas, how they're connected. And it got me thinking about a comment you said earlier. You were talking about how the government, you may not want the government handling your money after you pass away, when talking about trusts and things like that. What would you say are like some ways that people can build tax efficiency using those areas of the law, using estate planning? What are some things that you've seen, or some tips for that people could look for when they're talking to you or to another estate planner?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because there are a lot of attorneys that say that they do wills. And there are a lot of accountants and financial planners that say they do estate planning. And so what I've tried to do is to know enough about everything in this area to point people in the right direction. Now, I'm not a CPA. I don't do many tax returns, but I know a lot of CPAs, and I will point you in the direction for filing returns. And same thing with financial advisors. I don't give financial advice, but I know a financial problem when I see it, and so I'll point somebody in the right direction. But here are some tips based on some problems that I saw when one of those other professionals was driving outside of their lane. And one thing you have to worry about is property taxes. When you transfer property, either today or after you pass away, it's just an issue that you need to take notice of. Another tax issue is capital gains. People ask me all the time, should I just give my property to my children right now while I'm still alive? And for a lot of reasons, you might want to wait. And one of those reasons is if you pass on property after you pass away, you can probably save on the capital gains tax. Something else that could come into play is when somebody recommends that you put your assets into a trust. I had a client who got this advice from a CPA, and the CPA was recommending a trust that didn't have tax efficiency in it. There is a certain kind of irrevocable trust that you can use that uses the grantor's income tax, but also transfers the property. So it's a way to get the best of both worlds when that's appropriate. So I try and bring those things together. I try and look at somebody's situation through 4 lenses instead of 1.
I like it. I like it. And they're all related. It's very cool how that works out. And I like what you said there. You want to know enough to give the advice, but you're not trying to do someone else's job, because you've seen the detriment of that before, where people are
right. We refer when we can, because the amount of information that it takes to be good at what you do is unbelievable. That's why I spend so much time and money educating myself, not only on business and running a business, but also on estate planning, elder law, business law, and administration law.
Let's see. I wanted to ask a question here about, let's see. I wanted to ask you about one thing you said about the step up in basis, because I could see that being a very powerful tool when it comes to tax efficiency. Could you give more specifics on that? Like because I see that from like the wealth management standpoint, you could kind of set yourself up where you have those capital assets. How could you set it up where there's a lot of those capital assets where you could save on the capital gains tax after you pass away, when you're passing it to your estate?
Well, if you're married, it's a good idea to arrange things so that you can get the double step up in basis, so that the cost basis is the amount, the value of the asset when you purchased, whether it's land, real estate, or stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And so when you pass away, then the tax law says that you can have an adjusted basis. And usually it's a step up, but it could be a step down if your assets were less valuable after you passed away than before. But you want to make sure that your accounts and the title to your property are set up so that you can have that step up in basis. And you're right, it is a big benefit, because capital gains tax could be 15% or 20%. But you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by doing one thing, like transferring the title to your property so that you can reduce the value of your estate for estate tax purposes, but then create this other capital gains tax problem. So that's why we use trust law with power of appointment powers and in our grantor trust, so that you can get the benefit of both worlds, where you get the grantor's income tax status, and at the same time you're able to transfer the asset. But I wouldn't do that without the advice and counsel of an attorney, a CPA, and a financial advisor, all three. And people say, well, that's expensive. Well, if you do it the wrong way, you're just going to be wasting money on the government. We can help you save money for a net savings.
Yeah, for sure. That can be huge on the family, keeping the money like in the family line, right? So it's cool.
That's right.
I love it. You talked about protection of assets. We talked a little bit about tax efficiency. What are some ways that estate planning and the areas of law that you're talking about can help people to protect their assets?
Well, the number one thing you can do to protect your assets is by having a plan, because a lot of bad things happen when people become disabled or incapacitated through no fault of their own. Remember, I said that physicians have figured out how to keep us alive a long time, and so we need to have a succession plan in place. You will be disabled or die, or both. And so you need to plan for that. And the way that we do that is through durable power of attorney, medical power of attorney, advanced directive to physicians, or using a living revocable trust. And that's where you name somebody you trust to make sure that you're not losing money in the stock market if you become disabled or incapacitated. Because we can make all kinds of mistakes with our own money, and we only have ourselves to blame. But when somebody else is managing money for me, they have a higher duty of care. And so when they take over my finances, they need to go back to a financial advisor and say, based on this guy's life circumstances, is he invested in the right things? And in the same way, look at the guy's budget and see if everything being spent is appropriate for his station in life. Because you can save money by canceling the cable and the phone line and lots of other subscriptions if the guy isn't using them anymore. And further, you can help protect him from making costly mistakes over the phone with scams and fraudsters who call you on the phone or send you emails and try and separate you from your money. So the best way to protect assets is to have a plan in place. Another way is to talk to an attorney about what assets are protected by the Texas Constitution and the Texas Property Code, and how to diversify your assets so that you're doing well, you're getting interest, dividends, or appreciation of your assets without being subject to business setbacks, economic downturns, divorce, and frivolous lawsuits.
Yeah, I love it. Brought up some key points that got me thinking here. Like, if you're incapacitated, who would make financial decisions for you, or medical decisions, those tough decisions? Could you give people some advice on choosing who you would trust in that position? Because that's a very...
Well, I talked a little bit about who the executor should be.
Yeah.
And so you'd probably name the same person to be your trustee or your agent under financial power of attorney. So let me talk a little bit about medical power of attorney, because this is something that I see people gloss over. They'll name somebody, usually an adult child if they have children, who just happens to be involved in the medical industry. And they think that person is going to do the right thing, whatever that is. I have seen some people in the medical industry who do not ask questions. They do not challenge assumptions made by physicians and other medical personnel. Yeah. And they just go with whatever the first recommendation is. And I've learned through the experience of others, and I've learned through some family members' experience too, that that's not always the best way. I want to name somebody who's going to confront those people and is going to say, why are you doing that? What are the alternatives? Is there somebody else that we need to talk to that might have a different opinion? You want to get multiple opinions, and you want to find out what the alternatives are, because sometimes they're just giving you what the easiest thing for them to do is, not what's best for you or your family member. So I'll pick somebody who's slightly antagonistic, because I know they're going to confront those questions. They're not going to be afraid, and they're not going to just defer to somebody in the medical profession because of the level of education that they have.
Understood. That's important. So that sounds like someone more outspoken, not afraid of, stirring a little bit of controversy. Someone who speaks up, basically.
Yeah, just ask some questions.
Yeah, I like it. Some other results you get is, reducing family fighting. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Some of the tools that you have for reducing family fighting?
Well, the first tool is just to talk about it, because some people don't think about that. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what the unintended consequences are going to be. So one of the things I talk about is, what is your philosophy about dividing up the assets? So a lot of people have kids, and so I'll go back to that example. If you have more than one child, is it your philosophy that when they were growing up, you always spent exactly the same amount of money on each of the children on everything? Was it your philosophy that everything always be equal? Or in the alternative, is it your philosophy that you spent a fair amount on each based on their unique circumstances? Now, overwhelmingly, the majority is equal. They say it has to be equal. I don't want them to fight. And that's fine. Sometimes fair is what they go after because one child is disabled or has setbacks in life that have somehow resulted in a situation where the child is not going to have a large retirement to lean on when they're disabled and retired.
Mhm.
So the first step is just having that conversation. The second step is, if you do acknowledge that there's already conflict, which is just sometimes sibling rivalry, then you develop the plan so that somebody else is in charge. You don't have to name one of the children. You don't want to put one child in charge of the other children's inheritance because it's going to cause conflict. It's like a creditor-debtor relationship, and nobody wants to have to ask money from your sibling because it's thought that you're on an equal playing field. And so I would suggest that they name somebody else to be executor, trustee, or power of attorney in that circumstance, and that will avoid a lot of conflict.
Understood. And maximizing government benefits is another thing I saw, and I know you work with a lot of veterans in your business. So can you tell us a little bit about as well? There's a lot of veterans benefits and things like that. So how do you help people maximize government benefits? What are some examples of that?
Good question. I think it's fair for us to use the rules, regulations, and laws to help people use government benefits that they've already paid for. You know why? Because Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, the billionaires, are not going to pay any federal estate tax. You know why? Because ever since they earned their first million, they hired good attorneys, accountants, CPAs, and financial advisors to help them navigate the tax code. And so I've just made it my business to know all the regulations and rules and laws that go into government benefits so that people in the middle class can use the tax dollars they've already paid to get some of those benefits. It's like tax planning. If you wanted to just pay the IRS your 10, 20, 30, 40% of your income and not claim any deductions at all, the IRS would let you do that. They're not going to tell you if you've missed a deduction. Same thing with government benefits. They tell you what the general rules are. You have to have low assets, low income, and you have to follow all these complicated regulations. Health and Human Services is not going to help you figure out how to keep your money and qualify for benefits. Well, the reason I got interested in this is because when I was in law school, my dad's mom was in the nursing home, and I just happened to be visiting, and I asked my granddad how everything was going, and he said, "I'm going to be broke. I'm spending $90,000 a year on this nursing home, and I don't know what to do." And I said, "Granddad, I think there is something you can do to get her qualified for government benefits." And he said, "No, there's not. I already tried." Well, he wasn't going to take his grandson's advice. God bless him. That's okay. It got me interested to help others. And so the reason I think it's important, especially in that circumstance, is because a lot of people I see have enough money saved up for one spouse to have good long-term care. And so if you're the healthier spouse, you know that's not you. You know the first spouse, you're going to spend most of your money taking care of them. And you're just full of anxiety every day, every week, every year. And sometimes the caregiving spouse is the one that dies first because stress is bad for the heart.
Yeah.
And so if I can help relieve some stress by saying, here's a way to get the government to pay for a large portion of this care so that you can save some money, that means the world to them. And we can do that through Medicaid, or we can do that through the veterans pension. A lot of veterans and their spouses don't know that they can qualify for a benefit through the Veterans Affairs Administration, even if they weren't injured in a war. All they have to do is have served during a period of war, be honorably discharged, and have low income, low expenses, and high unreimbursed medical expenses.
I used to have a friend who would, very specific cases, but he would go to Vietnam vets and tell them, like, if you were exposed to Agent Orange, there's like a special benefit you could get that not a lot of people knew about. They were very surprised. So very cool. I love that. And one more question on estate planning. And the question is, just real quick, other than not doing it at all, what are some big mistakes you see people do when they have the right intentions, they're trying to set up their estate planning? What are some mistakes people should avoid?
Big mistake is relying on beneficiary designations. I had a client, she hired me to stop her siblings from harassing her after their father died. Their father lived with her because he couldn't take care of himself, and their father thought it would be appropriate, a good idea, to name her, the daughter, as the primary beneficiary of the brokerage account, which is allowed. Well, after he passed away, she became the sole beneficiary, and at the funeral, her siblings asked her how much they were going to get and when they were going to get it. She was distraught. She was sad. She was grieving. She said, "I don't know, leave me alone." Well, it didn't stop at the funeral. It didn't stop after the funeral. They kept calling like creditors. And she called me and said, "How do I get them to stop?" Well, even though she didn't have to, I filed an application for probate so that I could get an injunction to stop them from harassing her, which of course they ended up paying for through a reduced amount of distribution from that account because they had to pay the legal fees. If they had just collaborated and gotten along, they would have saved a whole lot of money. Another thing that nobody knew is that because she inherited the whole account, any amount that she gave to any of them was going to be subject to federal gift tax from her. The gift giver is the one that pays the tax. And so it wasn't the deceased father, it wasn't the ungrateful sibling beneficiaries, it was the caring, loving caregiver daughter who just happened to be the primary beneficiary on the account. Now there's other unintended situations that can happen, like when a minor child or a disabled beneficiary is named as a beneficiary of the account, or when the beneficiary of the account dies. Sometimes the beneficiary of the account isn't disabled until later in life, and people try and set these beneficiary designations and then forget it. So I include a letter with all my estate plans now that says, if you have questions about your beneficiary designations, you should ask me because I'm here to help you with that. But if you have a problem because of your beneficiary designation down the road that I didn't know about or have an opportunity to discuss with you, then that's something that you're going to have to deal with. It's unintended usually. People just presume that they know who the beneficiaries are and that it's always going to be that way. Well, I don't know about you, Joseph, but I don't have a crystal ball, and if I did, I wouldn't see anything in there.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy, the weight of those decisions. Like little things like that can have a huge impact on the family down the road. I lied. I have another question that popped up. So we live in this age of like social media and stuff like that with like social media passwords. Is that like a thing now? Like where people like, I hear people say like, oh, I send all my passwords to my sons and stuff, or my daughters if something happens to me. What is the best practice for that currently? And it sounds kind of like Everything I've heard right now sounds willy-nilly when it comes to that. So what would you
Right.
say is the best practice?
It is an issue. Passwords, digital assets,
Mhm.
accessing your assets online. It's actually illegal to give your credentials to somebody else.
Wow.
It's illegal. It's against federal law. There's a Federal Communication Act that makes it illegal. So I could never advise somebody to break the law. Some best practices are, in your power of attorney, you can give somebody authority to access your account, but it's not by giving them your credentials. It's using their authority and dealing with the online account through their policies and procedures. And state and state laws have been changing to give people authority, to give the agent under power of attorney authority, to give the executor and trustee authority. But here's the best practice. Some online social media platforms allow you to name somebody, just like a power of attorney. For example, Google calls it the inactive account manager. And so you go to your settings, you find that setting, and you decide who you're going to name. And then they ask you, when is it going to be appropriate for us to email this person? And you decide 30 days of inactivity, 60 days, 90 days. And so you can write a really sappy love note to your significant other or to your beneficiary about
Yeah.
how much you trust and love them and what they should do with your account after you're gone. Facebook also has something similar where you can name somebody to manage your account after you pass away. So that would be the best practice, using each account's policy and procedure, because even though we do have the state law to rely upon, some of those other social media platforms make it difficult on the executor and agent under power of attorney.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. Thank you for that. And next, I want to get into Talk Law Radio. And how long have you been doing Talk Law Radio?
I've been on the radio for almost 4 years now, and I have 153 unique episodes.
Wow.
Now, sometimes I have to do a rerun if I'm going to be out hunting or on Christmas break, and sometimes I have repeat guests, but I have 153 unique episodes.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool. And out of those, I wanted to ask you, that's a lot of different interviews, people you've talked to. Out of those 153, which episode would you say you learned the most from?
I think I learned the most from, let me see, well, I'll tell you about some of my favorites.
Okay.
I don't remember which one is my favorite and which one I learned the most from. But some of my favorites are when I do the law and gospel. So at my church, the pastor always talks about the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Old Testament is the law, and then what Jesus does for us, that's the gospel. And so when I started doing radio, I thought, I'll talk about some aspect of state, federal, or municipal law, and then I'll compare it to what the Bible says. And so I like to have a pastor on the show to talk about the gospel, because although I know some things, I didn't go to school for that, and I like to have professionals talk about what they know best. And so some of my favorite episodes were when we talked about the law and gospel of divorce. That may be what I learned most about doing a radio show. I chose a conservative pastor who believed that nobody should be divorced because of what it says in the Bible. And then I chose a very progressive attorney to talk about divorce, and she thought it would be unreasonable for people to be unhappy and that divorce was okay. And so in the elevator on the way up to the radio station, I I had this dread of what's going to happen when we're live and on the air.
Wow.
Well, it turned out that both the pastor and the attorney were incredibly professional, and they were incredibly respectful of one another. They had opposing views, but nobody said anything mean, obnoxious, or rude. They each had their own opinion, and we had a civil discussion about it. It was just awesome. But it reminded me or impressed upon me what could have happened. And so now I'm a little bit more careful about how I pair up the guests. Another episode that I really learned a lot from was the episode, also Law and Gospel, of end of life decision making. So we had a pastor talking about what the Bible says, and I had a student working with me at that time who had experienced being in a coma. And she said that if somebody had told her physicians to withhold and withdraw life support when she was in that coma, she wouldn't be breathing today, giving that testimonial on that episode. And so I saw a very broad range of things that could happen, and it really allowed me to talk more about it to my clients at the office. So those were two episodes that I learned a lot from.
I like it. Law and Gospel. Very cool. And let's see here. One more question on Talk Law. I wanted to ask you, just through, talking to lots of different people, is there any question that made you rethink anything, like a belief that you had or anything like that? Have you ever talked to someone and it made you like rethink your current way of doing the
it may have been that episode on end of life.
Yeah.
But another show that I did with a different pastor was on estrangement.
Mhm.
And I do see clients from time to time that are estranged from family members. And I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm really not the one to help you work through those feelings of estrangement. I just know that it's there. And I approach those situations without judgment. But I learned that the lives that we live today are not all that different from lives, the way families lived back in biblical times. And so we can learn a lot about how to treat each other and how to lead our families. I learned a lot from somebody I met just a few days ago. This woman was the third wife of the gentleman I was working with, and I was helping them with their estate planning.
Mhm.
And she had a philosophy of love conquers all. And so she had a very good relationship with this gentleman's two ex-wives, all of their stepchildren, and it was her personal mission in life to just keep the family together and try and work out any disagreements between any of them. And I thought that was really a blessing for me to see. I could feel her love and energy from that. And I'm not saying that people that are estranged did anything wrong. I'm not the person to pass judgment on that. I just always have hope that there would be a way to reconcile. And like I said, there might be circumstances beyond everyone's control, but I can have that secret hope and help people avoid their estranged loved ones if that's what they want to do. And that's another way of avoiding conflict.
Yeah, that's true, right? Yeah.
Well, let me say this one other thing. There's
Yeah.
a myth out there that you have to leave people that you're going to disinherit $1. That's no longer the case. Back in the olden days, attorneys gave that advice because if you leave somebody out, it leaves open the argument that you left them out because you forgot about them, because of a medical condition that you have. You just didn't know what you were doing when you signed that will. And so you leave them $1 to acknowledge that they were a person that could have received an inheritance from you. We don't do that anymore because the state of Texas passed a law that says every beneficiary, whether they receive $1, $100, or $1 million, is going to get notice of probate. And so you don't want to invite somebody that's going to be disgruntled about their gift to a legal proceeding, because then that gives them an opportunity to file a will contest. Instead, we acknowledge them all the same as a potential beneficiary, as a family member, without leaving them anything. Instead, we say, I specifically disinherit this person, and period. That way they don't receive any notice of the proceeding because they're not entitled to notice. They're not a beneficiary. That's another way of protecting assets.
Wow. It's probably better for both sides too. Less drama right at that meeting. And then you wouldn't want to go and be summoned to these proceedings to see you got $1. I mean, that would be.
That's right. It's embarrassing.
With everyone there. So of course you would be angry. It would just cause a bunch of drama.
Right.
Okay, awesome. A few more questions before I let you go. I wanted to ask you, in the journey to where you are today, what's something that seemed like a bad thing at the moment, but now you realize it was a good thing?
Well, I always wanted to be an owner, but there was a time when I worked for somebody else, and I wanted to be an owner of his law firm. And I had joined this solo practicing attorney. I was the secretary, the legal assistant, the paralegal, and the associate attorney all in one. I helped him grow his practice. When I left, there were 6 attorneys, and there were at least 6 support staff. We had grown, we had multiplied over the almost 3 years that I was with him. And so when I asked him to be partner and he said no, not only no, but I don't want to work with you anymore, it didn't really crush me. It broke my heart because I really valued the skills and talents that he had, but to find out that my talents and skills were not valued, that did break my heart. But it was a push into my own practice. And that very first day, when I got home and unloaded all my office furniture, I got a call on my mobile phone from somebody who needed legal help. And from that day on, I would reassure my wife. I would say, the Lord will provide, because that's what it says in the Bible. And every time we needed groceries or we needed to pay the mortgage, money would show up. And we just continued faithfully believing that whatever business mistake I had made would be somehow corrected if I just kept the faith and kept one foot in front of the other. And so I give all the glory to God. It's through His will that I've been able to take it this far. And I still intend to go further. My dad said that you can't ignore the dream in your heart. If you have a dream, that it's because God put it there, and you should listen to that, and you should follow that, and you should cultivate that. And so I continue to do that even when people say that I'm crazy. I wanted to introduce one more friend on this program.
Yeah.
Lexi, come here. Come here. I have to give her a little treat to get her on camera. Come on. Lexi's my best friend. I didn't intend to have a dog come with me everywhere that I go, but when we acquired her, it just became that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. So cute. Awesome. And final question, then I'll let you can promote anything you'd like to promote. I did talk about Talk Law Radio a little bit, but If you could leave the audience watching today and in the future, anyone who sees this interview, one last important message, what would that message be?
The important message that I try and tell everybody is whether you have $1,000, $1 million, or $1 billion, you should do something to plan for your affairs, because it's going to make things easier for those that you leave behind. And it's just selfish of you to avoid difficult conversations and confronting difficult life decisions today, tomorrow, and decades from now, to just avoid that. And so you can make a large gift that doesn't have any monetary value just by making things easier for your loved ones, by having written plans in place that are legally enforceable. And so they can find out a lot of information, free information, by going to www.talklawradio.com, where they can search archived episodes, or they can go to YouTube, or they can go to the law firm website, www.marquardtlawfirm.com. I have been writing blogs ever since 2007 about the law. I didn't grow up in a lawyer's household, and so everything I know about the law, I had to learn myself. And so I try and put it into words that are easily understood, that my nephew and niece can understand, that my mother, father, grandmother, grandfather can understand. And so you should be able to get some information on my website at the law firm or through Talk Law Radio. And then that'll help you decide what issues you might need to confront in your own life.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Todd. I appreciate you. It was great.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for having me. You're a lot of fun to talk to.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Hang on for a second. I'm going to end the broadcast and then stay on afterwards. Let's see.
Okay.